country that is suffering from the world's longest going civil war. In spite of the military coup that has turned the country dark, this golden land has a very vibrant culture. Let's go to Myanmar, also known as Burma. Our special guests today are Joe and Trish. Joe is the host of Insight Myanmar podcast, your ultimate source for all information related to Burma. He also extensively discusses Buddhism. His articles have been featured and referenced by many leading media houses globally. Would Buddha enjoy eating a cheeseburger? Trish, on the other hand, is a Burmese chef who's cooking up a revolution. She provides an on the ground perspective and shares insights about Burmese cuisines. I'm your host, Tanmay Shah, and you're listening to Rocklaz Radio. We are on a mission to bring conversations from every country of the world. If you want to be a part of that journey, hit the subscribe button for Rocklaz Radio on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and wherever you get your podcast from. So, what were you saying? It's a significant day.
Yeah, we are recording one day after August 8, and this is the 35th anniversary of what's known in Myanmar as the 4/8s, 8888, August 8th, 1988. This was a massive democracy movement that was resisting the military regime at the time. 5 years later, it's continuing to resist the current regime, but it's quite a significant day. So there's been a lot of acknowledgement online and also some very careful protests in the country and some protests outside the country as well.
Amazing. You have published over 180 episodes. You have been writing a blog since 2012. What is your favorite thing about Myanmar?
Favorite thing about Myanmar? Gosh, I mean, I have a 20-year relationship with Myanmar. So in like any relationship, in those 20 years, I've changed. Myanmar has probably changed. Certainly my understanding of Myanmar has changed. So it's not a simple question, I think, but if I was to try to give it a simple answer, I think there's something really remarkable about the people, and I don't want to exotify it or romanticize or put a rosy lens there. It's a country like any other. It's a people with their human characteristics like any other, but I do think there's a special quality of kindliness and generosity and open-heartedness and warmth, which is probably somewhat ironic to say when we're talking about one of the worst military regimes that we've known in modern age, and yet this is a country of contradictions. Living in the country as long as I have and thinking about it as much as I have, I've come to learn that there's a way that I have to hold contradictory realities, and I think for me that came up early on because I went to the country with an interest in meditation and Buddhism, but my work was through the U.S. Embassy and leading training programs. And so I was in my on time and my off time, I was living and interacting with very different parts of Myanmar society that didn't really add up together and that really contradicted each other. And so early on, I just kind of had to accept these seeming contradictory aspects which coexisted and to start to look at the country through different lens, and realizing that as I looked through different lens, I was finding different things, and sometimes those lens weren't compatible with each other. That was just kind of a mystery that I tried to hold.
What about you, Trish? You have grown up there and you had to leave. What is the thing you miss the most about Myanmar?
Uh, well, I was born and raised in Burma, but it was after the 88 also. So it was like during coup time, but it kind of like starting to open up a little bit. So it was a very different experience for me. And it was pretty like constricted and limited in its own way, but then they were slowly, I guess, like capitalizing like a lot of things, and trade was like becoming better and stuff like that. but it was a weird like transitioning period when I went back in 2010. Yeah. And like a lot of things opened up, but also like it was weird. It was weird as in a lot of foreign investors come in, and then the sudden boost in economy and everything was digitalized completely. My mom learned how to use Facebook within like a week time, and everyone was just all like my parents' generation was like on the phone constantly. So there was like a weird shift. Um, but the thing that I miss the most would definitely be food. Yeah,
Food.
food.
So
Yeah.
what's your favorite food?
Ah, that's such a difficult question for me. I guess. Depending on the region, but definitely my mom's food. But just in general, like how a lot of developing countries, you are like we're always like talking about like organic food and stuff like that, but then we eat that on a daily basis. Like wet markets are like steps away, and then it's such a culture every morning for everyone to go to the market, and then like yeah, so I think I miss that culture. Yeah.
Can you type a name of the dish in the chat box? I will pull it up and show to the audience the photos of it.
Oh, okay. I mean,
And
I
as you're pulling up,
definitely definitely the iconic one, it would be just mohinga. Yeah.
there's something
Mm.
very fascinating I saw about Myanmar. You actually eat tea over there, tea leaves.
Yeah, like pickle tea leaves.
That's very interesting. I had never heard of somebody eating tea leaves before. I mean, everybody has tea, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
eating it
it's
as a salad.
yeah, it's originally from China, and then with the trade, like the tea culture arrived in Burma, right? And then we had to figure out a way to like store it or like longer shelf life, and that's literally through fermentation. So it's been salted over, heavy salt in it, and then fermented in like big barrels over months, and then yeah, you can consume it, and it's really good for you actually. Yeah.
I pulled it up. Let us show the audience on the screen. So what is this called?
Pickle tea leaf. But mohinga is my
Mohinga.
favorite. Yeah, it's like a Burmese fish chowder. That's the closest explanation.
Hmm.
um, yeah.
So it is noodles with
Yeah, it's
some
rice
curry and
vermicelli, and then more like a fish based broth. That's take it's a labor of love making that. It probably takes about like 2 days to make it. Like it's a process, and it's pretty interesting mohinga. Like there's so many different types of mohinga, and where I come from is from Yangon mohinga, um, but originally it's come from the middle region, where there's abundance of fish, and then um, like this is through historical speaking, like because we don't really have a lot of like recipe records, and it's been yeah,
how is
another fermentation process as well in the broth.
how is mohinga different from the Chinese soups we see in Singapore or wherever? Even Tibetan. The closest I've had is in Tibet, where they have these. Um, it's water-based curry with a lot of noodles and all
Mm,
that, and a
mm,
dumpling, a momo
mm.
inside it. I just loved it. So how is this different from those Chinese dishes? What makes it unique Burmese dish?
Well, depending on the region that you go to, right? They have like abundance of fish, and then learning how to use and extract like maximum flavor from the bones broth, actually. And then the meat as well is sort of toasted for fragrance, and then mixed together with the fish bone broth. So like it's a very like sustainable dish. So it's like bone to flesh. Like you don't throw any parts of it. and it's simmered for hours and hours for like the homogeneous flavor. So and
Hmm.
the use of like that crispy chickpea, like it's also very interesting because it's also influenced by from the Indians as well. And there's also other toppings, like different toppings that you can choose as well. So it's a
Hmm.
it's a dish that's been developed over the years. Yeah.
Beautiful. And this is the tea cuisine.
Yeah, this is the pickled tea leaf. We're the only country in the world that pickled our tea yeah, tea leaves. And yeah, it's really yummy.
I wonder how it tastes like.
um I've actually tried like mimicking a little bit by like, oh, what if places there was this one time in this country that I didn't have any pickled tea leaves. So the closest is like pesto with a lot of garlic and chili inside, like fresh pesto, and then you churn it up with like a lot of nuts, any kind of nuts, and a lot of lime and a lot of garlic. That's the closest
So
flavor.
tea usually gives you a high, right? People get a kick out of drinking tea like they do with caffeine and all that. So when you're eating the tea leaf itself, like do you feel a high? Like maybe
Um,
10 glasses together.
I don't. I mean, I was born and raised in that culture, so I'm pretty like used to it. I guess I don't like Joe. Have you? How
What
was it for
about
you?
Joe?
Yeah.
One second, you're on mute.
Okay, I'm okay now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh, I've I think it's hard to eat that much of it because it's so strong. You know, there's so much garlic and whatever else they put in there, chili or small shrimp or whatever. But I think that it's so rich, the flavor, that I think that I've never had any kind of caffeine high from it, and I wouldn't be surprised if fermentation changes the chemical composition. But also it's just I just think that it's a little bit of it tastes so the taste is so intense that that it you know, I don't think you can't really have all that much of it. But just to get a couple little anecdotes to add on to the tea leaf salad are kind of interesting. One is that it's really like the standard thing that you serve guests. So
Oh.
anytime you would, and I don't just mean informal occasions, like really, I mean, you might just be tagging along with your friend and you happen to go by their relative's house or something. You walk in for 10 minutes and, you know, the polite thing they offer you is they're going to, the little lacquer picture that you showed us, they're going to take that out. Sometimes if you go to restaurants, they'll have that there. But then another interesting feature is, this gets a bit technical, but it might be interesting for your listeners. You know, there are many Buddhist monks in the country, and the Buddhist monks are required to follow a discipline that was set down by the Buddha 2,500 years ago that's still very exact in terms of what those rules are. Part of those rules
Mm.
involve not being able to eat any food after 12 noon. And as you can imagine, with any kind of religious guideline, kosher or Muslim standards, whatever it is, that there's a lot of debate over what exact, you know, when exactly is noon and what constitutes food or not food, and different cultures and monastic traditions have their different interpretations. Even different sects have their different interpretations. Why this is interesting in Myanmar and why this is interesting with tea leaf salad is that the question of is certain kinds of drinks, are they, and juices, are they food or not? And there are very strict guidelines about how you have to strain it and what you can drink and what you can't. Tea is something that some of the more stricter Burmese monks historically have argued should not be drunk by monks after noon. And the reason for that is that tea is something that's edible in their culture. And so they think about it in a different way than other countries would, where other countries would see tea as something obviously a flavored liquid. Some monks have argued that it's basically like a light soup broth, you know, flavored like a tea soup broth. And it's not real. Most monks today in Burma, most of them drink tea afternoon. Most of them don't follow that. But it is interesting that there has been a line of argumentation that it does constitute a food, and it's been argued that, tea is something that they eat in Burmese culture, so the line of thinking is not that separate as it would be in other countries and cultures.
Mm-hmm. Before the next question, I quickly want to show where is Burma on the map, and what is a better name to call it, Burma or Myanmar?
I don't. I call it Burma, but it just really depends.
What do you think, Joe?
I tend to call it both, which is probably not that smart, but I just haven't made my mind. But it's traditionally the Burma was more the spoken informal word, and Myanmar was more the written formal correspondence. And so when the British arrived, they took the spoken word they were hearing, they called it Burma. There was no real political connotation that was different between Burma and Myanmar historically. One just referred to the written formal connotation, and one was more the spoken one. But the real divide came after the 1988 elections that we were just talking about that made the country democratic. The military regime did not honor those elections. And not only did they not honor the elections, but to kind of cement their imprint and ownership of the country, they officially changed the name of Burma, which it was after independence from England, to Myanmar. And so after this decision, it took on these strong political connotations that continue to this day, where using the word Myanmar by some is kind of an acknowledgement or a legitimization of the government, of the regime,
Of the
and
army, of the
it,
coup.
Yeah.
right, and using the word Burma is kind of like the real spirit of the people. So it's taken
Oh,
on these other
wow.
connotations that it never had historically.
So yeah, I thought it was the people of Myanmar who wanted the name Myanmar, and Burma was, what do you say, colonial name. But it turns out it's the opposite. It's Myanmar is more connoted or seen as with the military coup, and people localized sympathize with Burma. So okay, let's stick with Burma then. So
Well,
it's
it's interesting because in the country they do call
Yeah.
it Myanmar. The people call it Myanmar, but
Yeah.
when the country changed the name, they politicized something that never had political connotations.
So
Yeah.
here is Myanmar and Burma, as you can see in the brackets, between Thailand, India, and China, and a bit of like Laos. So in India, it touches Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram, and this is the capital. And
Yangon, yeah. Well, I mean,
Yangon is actually how we know it as Rangoon. It has come in the history books and all that.
yeah,
Rangoon
Yangon was the old
is
capital, but yeah, I guess another political move as well is changing
Yep.
Naypyidaw as their capital.
it's such a green country. You must be having a lot of greenery, or is it all tea leaves covering this green? It's very interesting.
Yeah.
So, this you have been to Burma, lived there, and you speak to so many people. What is one thing you would like to change about Burma, Joe?
One thing I would like, well, first of all, it's not my country, so I don't really approach conversations or even culture with a sense of, I think Burma, Myanmar has a long enough history with foreigners that are going into it thinking that there's something that needs to change. That's not the way that I want to approach it. If there's any change that I want to see, it's at the individual level through the power of community and connection and communication. The work that I was doing in Myanmar originally was training, and training is all about the power of dialogue, communication, reflection, critical thinking, inner transformation, and that's something I believe in regardless of culture. I've always said the two things that have changed my life the most have been training and meditation. Training at a professional level and meditation, which was what brought me to Myanmar and the practice there. Those are things I believe in just universally, but I think I think that when I'm talking to friends or within a community or a group, there are definitely, there might be ways that we're navigating and having those conversations. But I do recognize that I might have some influence, and my ideas might might be of interest in some conversations, but I'm not. I'm coming in more with an interest to understand, to dialogue, to communicate, than to think that there's something that I have an answer to that needs to impact and affect the society.
Joe, had you gone to Burma as a diplomat?
No, I went I went to Burma first as a meditator. I was a backpacker slash meditator who was going. I was going only for meditation. I was a Vipassana meditator in the tradition of S.N. Goenka, who's actually an Indian who grew up in
Oh,
Burma and then went back to
Vipassana.
India. Yeah, yeah. So that was, so I went in that capacity, and in 2003, and I was really moved. It felt like this practice that I was trying to do in America was, especially at that time, was so much against the stream of conventional American society. And that month I spent in Burma in 2003, I just felt like everything was supporting my practice. I was a bit naive, I have to admit. There's a lot I didn't understand from a 1 month visit, but I did feel supported in a way that, and just felt there were opportunities of spiritual growth and practice all around me, that I wanted to come back. And I didn't know how I would come back. It was a very closed country at the time, very xenophobic. The regime was, not the people. But
Mm.
I happened to be really fortunate that in 2007, I was able to come back and work at the American Center, which was connected to the embassy, and to run training programs through it. So I was there from I lived there from 2007 on.
Interesting. To get the history straight, Burma got its independence around 1945, 47?
48, I think it was, if I remember.
48,
Yeah.
okay. And then it was, what kind of rule was it? Was it democracy until 1988?
Do you want to take that, Trish?
Let me go.
1940. I mean, like, whenever we claim to have like democracy, right? Like, it was the same. It's a transition period. So if you're comparing it to like true democracy, like it's not. Like in comparison to things like America, then it's being built over many years of it. It's like a solid, strong foundation for it. And then we were just got it, and I think it, I don't even know what to call that. It was like a pseudo democracy, I guess, or
in the history books, they tend to call it the parliamentary democracy period. From 48 to 62, there was a very
Okay.
rough period of democracy where the central government barely had control. They did not control the country. Their control barely extended from the city. There was ethnic infighting everywhere. There was communist insurgency. There was CIA supporting the KMT up to try to retake Mao in China. So it was just chaos everywhere. But they did have a free press, and the free press was very vibrant, and they did have a lot of celebrities who came and visited, from everything from the Russian ballet to American jazz musicians and astronauts. And it was very cosmopolitan. It was the jewel of Asia at that time. If you were anywhere from Calcutta to Singapore, you would want to come to Rangoon to study because it had the best universities. And in 1962, Ne Win was the dictator. In 62, they ended it. Ne Win took over power, and it was a military dictatorship from 62 until probably 2015. And then 2015 to 2020 was a short window of an experiment with democracy.
We studied about Burma in our history books with Aung San Suu Kyi, who has been home prison for such a long time, and she even stayed back despite the Rohingyas. A lot of controversy was happening. She decided to stay back. What are your views on Aung San Suu Kyi?
I guess I'll have to go first. It's a very uh a polarized thing, I guess, and for the longest time, my parents' generation grew up with the idea of putting her as the beacon of light, right? Like she's here to save us and
Hmm.
blah 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 blah. So she was really such an icon, and when like her period of 2010 and onwards was the NLD, like they took over and then took office and stuff like that. But then as someone a younger generation, um for me, I I don't like I admire her as a strong female figurehead for from our country, and I'm very proud of her and all of the victories that like all of the pain that she went through. Like it's not easy, right? But at the same time, politically wise and political decisions that could have been made for um, on behalf of the people, it would have been like I'm not a fan of her. Let's just say that.
Okay.
And it's over the years, we have, in my opinion, we have been given a chance, but then um, what over the 10 years, things that could have been prepped or given for the younger generation, it was not prepped well, and with the Rohingya case as well, that I strongly like oppose that for what she has like did with the ICJ case as well, like, and it's very, yeah, it's not a fan. But this has created a lot of chaos with the older generation, that the majority of the belief is that still she's such an icon, right? But then now we are noticing, especially in this revolution, is that we don't necessarily need her, and that we can still lead like other people, as our younger generation can still lead and gain independence on our own without her. And it's become that's the reality now, you know?
Hmm. How do the people look at the military dictator? We're talking to a guest from Sudan a couple of weeks ago, and the situation there is there are two army persons fighting against each other, and they don't care about the public, the people. They're just shooting everybody. Everyone has to run out and fly away from the country. How and Burma is one of the places where there's live conflict going on. How do the people like? What is the situation there on ground?
Um,
Hello.
yeah. Situation on the ground. Well, it's constant attacked and people being displaced and villages burned on a. It's almost become the norm, which is a really messed up thing.
Yeah.
To like we've lost count of the villages that they've burned, and it's just another day of just people being displaced and like um yeah, like displaced in the border of Thailand, India as well. So yeah, yeah. I don't like
So
Joa. Do you have any opinion?
Um,
anybody who talks against it is just massacred. The whole town of that person is burnt.
there are risks. Yeah. I mean, 17-year-old girls have been put in prison for liking Facebook posts that celebrate Aung San Suu Kyi's birthday or the democratic movement. Yesterday, as we mentioned, was the 35th anniversary of the 4/8, August 8th, 1988. And there were some youths that simply wrote the Burmese character for number 8 on an umbrella and walked around Yangon taking very careful pictures that then went viral around the world. I mean, they could be killed for that kind of political statement, just merely having an 8. You referenced that you listened to my podcast interview with Trish, which I definitely encourage listeners to check out. It goes much deeper into her background. She, like so many others, had to flee the country for safety and has no idea when she could ever go back. Many people like that around the world. And there's a real fear that, in 88, there was a lot of momentum that they were really going to take over to oust the military. And, um, and many for safety, many activists for safety and students had to go to the jungle or had to go abroad. And then they had to stay out for years, decades. Some of them had to restart new lives. And so it's just really tragic because you have a nation of, what, 55 million people, I think it is now, that are that have no safety. There's no rule of law. The only authorities in the country are terrorizing them. They're not protecting them. And the people that are lucky enough to be outside, well, they're not in harm's way, but they can't go back to their homeland, and they don't know how long they're going to be stateless or unable to return to their family or their home or anything else. And so it's really, it's one very mad dictator who's thrown so many lives into this kind of chaos.
Mhm.
If I
Trish?
if I may add to that, is a lot of identities. For example, for me, it took me about 2 years for me to be confidently coming out on a screen to show my face and stuff like that, because the how vindictive these military junta is that they, if they can't get you, they get your family. And for no reason, they would arrest your family. They will kill your family. If you're like a prominent political figure, forget about it. Like, you either, like, I have journalist friends who are here with their families, with their grandmas and with their grandpas and little kids, is what the entire family is here just to avoid that kind of conflict and arrest. Um, yeah, so it hasn't, even though that we're out of the country as well, like Joa said, that we don't know like how, when we will go back. But at the same time, the people who are living in the country right now is also facing a lot of economy crisis. Like, the economy has, the inflation rate is the highest ever. People can't afford to live. The poor is getting like just another class now, like a sheer like divisive class of cronies who are not affected by the coup at all. And to destroy the average youth mind now, they have implemented these structures in school. They are forcing kids to go to school, and if the kids don't go to school, they arrest them. But then the stuff that they are teaching at school are very like militarized and things to like brainwash them. And then now, what happened to the kids that who are not in school? Then the amount of drugs, this is, I'm hearing like on hand from all my friends back home, is that they do this as part of their strategy, is to destroy the youth's mind by allowing this drug trade to happen. So now it's like 10 times cheaper. Like, clubs are open despite the curfew, and then they let things slide on those things. And then, like, everyone's on pretty much on drugs now, like, especially the younger ones. Yeah, which is really messed up.
Trish, if you're comfortable, can
Mm.
you share the story of the day or days where you had to escape out of the country and come to a new place?
um it was it was a really funny day, as in, I acted like I was a rich girl, and as if I dressed pretty well. And luckily, at the airport, while I was leaving, I was pretty early. There were a lot of barricades, and they were checking all the IDs, and then all the soldiers were waiting at the airport, just like guarding up with all their guns. Um, and as I was queuing up, luckily I got in, like, I found a family that I know of, coincidentally, and they were also moving to Thailand. But then, so I befriended them and acted like I'm part of that family. And I also have another friend who was joining the flight, and get this, that flight is lit. We call it a zoo flight because at that time there's no flights like scheduled anymore, and there was this one, I think, like a business guy who pretty much booked the the airline like a private jet for himself, and then he was lucky enough to sell, like he wanted to make money out of this, so we bought the tickets, and that's how we got on the flight. So people were literally carrying their pets, and like, yeah, there were like rabbits and there were dogs and there were cats on the plane as well. But anyway, so I had my other journalist friends as well, but I was so scared that at that time they can just pull you over and arrest you at any time. So even when my friends were there, I made sure that I like was really distancing myself completely from them, and acted like I wasn't sad about leaving, and acted definitely like how, like, oh, I'm going on a vacation despite anything, like that kind of vibe.
Mm.
And I think even if I was still pretty scared, even if I was on the plane. And just only as soon as I took off, it was like, okay, like I am semi safe, because there's a chance that the
Mm.
Thai immigration could send me back anytime, because it was like a really bad COVID quarantine time as well. So it was like, I'm not going to take my chance. So I was really
Mm.
preparing. Only if I pass through immigration in Thailand, then I would feel safe. But
So there were
it
lots
was,
of.
yeah, it was emotional and pretty sad, because I was like, this is it, and this is the last time I'm in my own country.
So
Yeah.
there were so many odds against you. There was COVID happening, a sudden coup, and then again checks at the country you're taking off from in Burma, and you're landing. So many cross posts. Anything could have happened to you.
Mm.
The
Yeah.
decision to go out and be in a relocate. How much? How many days span did it take? Was it immediately on the day, or in a week of the coup, or you had been planning for it since a while?
I left on the 5th of April, so it took me a month to figure out a plan to leave. And luckily, like I think Thai embassy was being very generous with their visa, and they were just giving out like like lottery tickets. And for the first time, the Thai embassy was giving out visa in a span of like 3 hours. So um in a
Hmm.
way, I guess I called the right shots of going out at the right time. But it was a very complicated process, because we had no like guidelines, and it was very expensive as well, booking the hotels, and then also the internet was failing miserably. So we I had to
Hmm.
go to like the French embassy, I went to the US embassy, and to get the internet, but it was packed with a lot of their informers, and then it was so scary. But they have the best internet in the city. um but it got a little bit dangerous. So like, yeah, like that's how we moved from one location to another, just to upload like one document. And we have to be also very careful about where we do photocopy stuff, because there are times that there could be informers in that photocopy shop or print shop and stuff like that. So it
So you
was it
don't
was
know
quite stressful.
anywhere. Yeah, very stressful. You don't know who's watching, who's where, whom to trust, whom not to trust. Very difficult situation. One more
Yeah.
question about military, and then we'll talk about the brighter side of Burma. How does the military get support? Because you need ammunition, arms, and like, there has to be some international support to keep continuing this. Openly, there are many countries that oppose the military dictatorship, but what is exactly happening? Who supports the military in Burma?
Well, definitely China is behind them. And ASEAN countries are has been a major joke recently, especially Thailand, being the closest country, when we're expecting a lot of like humanitarian aid and help, but then they're really finding ways to like especially Mess Out area, when so many of us are displaced there with like no passports and no IDs, but then the police has found a market to exploit this crisis and try to get money out of us from these people who barely have
Extort.
IDs. extort money. Yeah,
extort
exactly.
whatever place possible.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
China is a big player in this, and how does China benefit from this? Joe, what do you think?
Um, China has BRI, which is the Belt and Road Initiative. They want to create massive infrastructure across Myanmar for their own benefit. They want stability. I don't think China necessarily prefers a military regime over democracy. They want investment and whatever. They didn't have bad relations with Aung San Suu Kyi and NLD. They really didn't. But they want to pick the winning horse. Russia has been a major player as well. I think Russia kind of celebrates somewhat of the renegade status of what the military is doing and kind of the us against the world mentality of being able to just live in their own kind of perverted reality. Just to give you a sense of that, the dictator Min Aung Hlaing in Burma recently thanked Putin for his work in creating in trying to push world peace and thanked him for all of his great work and the world peace that he was doing through his initiatives. And so I think Russia benefits by getting money to sell their arms, even though just last week, for the very first time, we actually saw evidence of Burmese arms being used by the Russian military against Ukraine, which is very new. But generally, Russia gets to make money by selling their arms. They get to have an ally in a strategic place. And I think for them, unlike China, I think they also get chaos. China doesn't want chaos, but I think Russia, especially Putin and that leadership, would only be too happy if Myanmar just erupted in chaos and was just kind of a mess for Western countries to have to figure out. But, another supporter we can't leave out is India. India has been very friendly to the regime. Modi has been very friendly to the generals, and they have not been supportive of the democracy effort. However, because of the structure of federal democracy that exists in India, you're able to have a country where the leader of the country is Modi can be friendly towards the military and openly resisting wanting to welcome refugees, while the regional leadership of neighboring states can have a very different attitude. And this was explained to me by one of our podcast guests. And so what you see are many refugees, especially Chin, because Chin State is on that western edge of the border, especially in Mizoram. Many Chin refugees and Burmese refugees of other ethnicities are fleeing into India and are being welcomed very warmly, especially in Mizoram, by some of those communities and cared for, even though the central government has a different policy. In Mizoram, we have in addition to the podcast we also have a nonprofit called Better Burma, which does a number of humanitarian projects. And we've built, I think it's 9 schools in Mizoram for 800 refugee children that that are now being able to, I mean, these are kids that haven't had school for like 3 years, from the military coup to the pandemic. They've completely lost the sense of normalcy. And we've been able to fund the building of these big schools with bamboo and wood that they're able to have, to educate their kids. So so even though the central government in India has not been very hopeful at all, to say the least, individuals have been so and have found shelter in in the nearby region. So that's been great.
Mhm. Very interesting. Let us. Burma is also called the Golden Land, and let's find out why. I see a lot of golden colored temples and a very peculiar, I think this is an architecture style typical to Burma. A lot of
Um,
gold. There was even a gold rock. So why do
Yes.
you think it's called the land of gold or the golden land?
well, Buddhism is like the predominant religion back home, and everywhere you go, there's temples everywhere. And I guess in a way, that also religion also plays a really big role in this revolution as well. Um, in a way too, and like the military has found a way to use Buddhism as a tool to um, persuade people to their side. But yeah, it is the Golden Land. There's temples everywhere. Shridagon is probably the biggest like temple in Asia. And there's Bagan. It's a city of temples, very ancient. And yeah.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
I would also include Golden Leaf, which is a feature of Myanmar, which is very very interesting, where they because gold is so associated with Buddhism and honoring having faith in Buddhist structures and images, and of course it's not a rich country, and so what they'll do, they do this in Mandalay. You can actually go to the workshops. They they pound gold, and they pound it so hard and for so long that it becomes so thin. Not only can you not touch it, but even if you put your hand just slightly over it, it will move because it's so thin. It's between wax paper. And so you can, just for a couple dollars, you could buy a pack of gold leaf, and you take off one wax side. You can't take off the other, otherwise it'll stick to whatever you're holding. And there's certain pagodas and Buddha images where you'll affix the gold leaf onto that image. And so it's a way for even people without a lot of money to feel that they're buying gold and applying gold to the religion, which is which they believe is giving them good merits.
Wow. So everybody can go and put a leaf on it. So it's a community effort to paint the temple gold.
You could say that.
Yeah. Pretty much.
I mean, these are the criticism would be these are outer manifestations, and there's always this contradiction in terms of the outer edifices that you're creating and the inner cultivation that Buddhism is, and many religions are really pointing to. And so, I think the kind of I think there's a pleasant way to look at this, in the sense that even people without a lot of means or money are able to feel like they're contributing to the gold of a pagoda that they want to worship. I think another way to look at it is that this is that there's a tendency towards away from the cultivation of inner mental states and meditation practice and ethical behavior to just build up the outside structures. And definitely we see that on a big level with what the generals do.
What attracted you to Buddhism, and why did you choose Burma in particular? There is India, Nepal, Tibet, many other countries in Asia and Southeast Asia doing preaching Buddhism. How did you center down on Burma?
I guess that's to me. I I had always been being young and reading different books and having different experiences, learning about different spiritualities. I'd always wanted to try meditation. I didn't know when I would try it. I thought maybe later in life. But as it was, I was living in Japan at the time, and I wanted to practice Japanese Buddhism because I was there, but I couldn't find a place where I can practice. Either I had to be fluent in Japanese, or I had to sit zazen, which is or sorry, to sit full lotus, which my body isn't flexible enough to do. And so I didn't know how I would practice meditation. And while I was living in Japan, someone told me about Vipassana, which was in the tradition of S.N. Goenka, who's an Indian businessman who grew up in Burma and has centers all around the world. And that was the first meditation I took. And it transformed me. It showed me possibilities of change that I had never thought were conceivable, that things about myself that I could see clearly and work on. And it really changed my life. And I went to more courses and became more involved in the tradition. And as you become more involved in the tradition, you learn about the lineage of teachers that comes from Burma. That Goenka was taught by Seyaji Ubaken, who was taught by Seataji, who was taught by the great Lady Sayadaw, who's one of the great, is lived in the late 19th, early 20th century. And he was really one of not just the great Buddhist monks in history, but one of the great Burmese in history, period. He was absolutely transformative in terms of how he brought the practice away from, how he brought practice being a practice, away from the study and the rituals, but the actual meditation, and brought it from the monks to the lay people and to girls and to elderly, and encouraging study and critical thinking to foreigners, engaging with Christianity and science, all these things that had never been done before. And Burma was where it came from. And so what drove me to go in 2003, that was my first visit there, was that I was just, everyone that I was meditating with, I was just hearing about, well, it comes from Burma, and someone had gone for a couple weeks and had this story to tell. And it's just like, man, I really want to go there and check that out. And so, it wasn't so much that I was interested in the grand tradition of Buddhism, and I just happened to land in Burma. It was that my particular gateway to meditation practice was a Burmese lineage. And that's what led me there.
That's an interesting fact. I didn't know that Vipassana and SN Goenka was from Burma. I always associated him with Kolkata and the eastern side of India. Very interesting. Joe, could you share an anecdote or a quote that you love the most about Buddha or in Buddhism?
Quote that I love the most about Buddhism. My mind is kind of torn between not traditional, but a quote from the Buddha's lifetime and the Buddha himself, 2,500 years ago, from one of the suttas, or choosing more something related to Burmese Buddhism, which is, my experience of living in the country. Those would be two different answers. I guess I'll go with the latter first. I think that Burmese Buddhism is complicated, just as Trish has talked about, and we've talked about here. There's a lot of ways the military has perverted it, and people have misunderstood it. And so I don't want to romanticize it as this perfect idealized thing. But even with those issues, I think that the sense of generosity that pervades a Burmese Buddhist spirit is something I've never experienced anywhere in the world. And the sense of joy that I've experienced at giving. I've never been in a country where so many people take such joy in the act of giving, in the act of generosity, and just a one-way, unconditional sense of giving something good. And as we're talking about, this brutal military that has just done so many terrible, selfish things for really no purpose. It's contradictory, but it's true. I can't tell you how many monasteries or meditation centers that I've come to that I'm given everything I need. I'm given a place to stay and food to eat and a place to practice, and any need looked after, and given it with absolute joy and generosity that I might benefit from this, and that this might help me along my way. And I think this is something that when I've spoken to many, many foreign meditators and monks and teachers on my podcast. And when I ask them a similar question, pretty much the first answer everyone gives is this answer of generosity, that especially those coming from spiritual practices to Myanmar, but even those that don't have a Buddhist practice and just expats who have managed to live there for a couple of years, almost everyone talks about the generosity first. And there was a famous study that was done about 5 years ago about the most generous countries in the world. It wasn't a Burmese study. It was like a Western study. And many people were surprised. Burma I think it was number one. I think Burma and the US were tied as whatever metrics they used, as among like 150 or 200 countries, as one of the most generous countries in the world. And anyone who has been there will affirm that. And that's, it's so contradictory to have to see the kind of selfishness that yeah.
I guess because Burmese are so generous, the dictator has come over. They're too even generous even to the dictator. All right. Going to the next question. This is for Trish. It's an activity that we like to do with everybody. If you could close your eyes, please close your eyes for us, Trish.
Okay.
Think of your favorite memory.
Okay.
And describe to us in Burmese.
In Burmese? Oh God.
Yeah.
Okay. It's Sunday and it was my
In
great
your own language, in Burmese, you have to
oh
speak in Burmese.
okay gathering လုပ်တယ်ပြီးရင်မိသားစုအကုန်လုံးရောက်လာပြီးတော့အဲ့မှာ
All right, beautiful. Now, can you describe that? Translate that in English.
So about like 20 years ago, Sunday, and it was my great grandma's sort of funeral anniversary. And we had our family gathering for the first time that all the families from there so dispersed and they all came on that day for a massive feast. And I remember cooking with my grandma, and that was a really fun day. Yeah. Another giving story. We just cooked for about about like 3,000 people. Yeah, our entire family, of course, have to help, and then yeah, we were just donating to in memories of our great grandma. Yeah.
What is your favorite traditional and cultural festival in Burma?
That's I mean a lot of people would say like the Dinjan, which is like the water festival. It used to be my favorite when I was young, but I think now maybe I might be a little bit of a pyromaniac as I was growing up. It could be the Rinjo, which is the fire cracking festival, the light festival, and it's basically originated from um, waiting for Buddha to come down from heaven, and we're just celebrating his coming and using these candles and the light. And but in our age, we use a lot of firecrackers, and I thought that was really fun. Yeah, it's still fun actually.
I pulled up some images of it because even in India we have a light festival, so it's interesting to see light festival of Burma. It's a lot of lanterns.
Yeah, a lot of lanterns. There's two actually. The Soundai, which is mostly towards the Shan people that celebrates it, which with the big balloons. It's a pretty hectic and chaotic festival. But the Rinjo is a bit more tied to the Buddhist practices. But also the Soundine is quite fun as well. But it's the balloon festival where they compete. Yeah.
What do you call
the
this?
rockets. It's called simi, and so in a little like clay plate, and then there's candle, and then you just light it up. Yeah. And usually we have to go to the temples to light it up. Yeah.
We call it diya in India, and we use it during Diwali. Diwali is coming in November this year. So yeah, that's the Indian festival of light. Very interesting to know about the balloon festival. I didn't expect this. Huge balloons flying and covering
it's
the
more
whole
like a
city.
competition. Yeah. And then you would have like these balloons and rockets like on top of you falling like everywhere. It's very dangerous, but it's fun.
So it's like a kite festival, but of balloons, like a balloon festival, fire balloon festival.
Rockets, yeah. We're known for living our life a little bit more dangerously.
And talking about traditions and culture, I have pulled some clothes also. So what is a traditional Burmese dress, and what do you call it?
It's tamane. Tamane is like for women, the way they wear the tamane, and for guys it's like
Do you see it on the
longji.
screen? Do you see it on the screen, or you can type it in the box? I will put it up.
So okay, for women it's called tamane. And for men it's called culture. behind Tamane is that it's because it's worn by women, there's a huge misogyny behind the word Tamane. So men in general don't want the women Tamane on top of them, or some men don't even want to like touch it. So during our protests, the last protest, we were guys, some of our friends, but they were guy friends, were putting on their head, and because it's a tradition, or like a very misogynistic thinking that
This
if a
this
man put a tamane on their head,
what is
it's
it? Hold on. What does it mean?
okay.
This the what they're wearing? This
Yeah, what
dress
they're
underneath?
yeah, the tamane, what they wore and underneath, yeah, is the tamane. So
So they that men wearing that on the head is
it's like it's almost like a taboo, like taking away their power of a man. Like it's called pong, taking away pong in Burmese, which is taking away the man's power, the higher power the man has. But if you put the tamane, which is considered like dirty, disgusting, and all the like yeah, like all the period stains on it and stuff like that, so it's deemed as like a lower power. And yeah, so we waved that as a flag during the protest and made a lot of our Burmese men wear it on their head. And then, strangely enough, during our like my area when we were protesting, and then we hung up like strings and strings of the tamane from one end to the other end of the road. So when the police are like crossing the road, that they wouldn't cross it. And like religious extremists, they would not pass underneath the tamane. So it was used as a
oh
defense like weapon to stop them from crossing into the street and stuff like that. So in a way that the something so like consider as dirty and like low power is now used as something to protect yourself. Um,
that is
which
so
is,
interesting.
yeah,
And what do you call this?
longji for guys, longji.
Yeah. And we have that in the south also. We call it lungi. It's
Longji?
similar word.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's wrapped around the hips. That's it. I like how the woman's dress is wrapped around, and it extends further. It's not like lungi, which is just gets over here.
Yeah. And also like different ethnicities have like different patterns based on the region. So like the Chins, for example, would have their different weaving patterns on it, which is very different to the Shans from where I'm from, and they have like a very different patterns. So, and yeah, and it's just a very interesting industry. Yeah.
Hmm.
They also tie it in different ways. There there are different ways to tie
Mm,
it based on the not just are there different qualities and patterns, but the way you wear it and tie it will also differ according to culture and the event you're going to, the formality.
yeah.
I before I went to Myanmar, I trained teachers in America. I trained them how to teach English, and we would train them in, how do you teach reading, how do you teach writing, and all these different aspects of it. And one component was how do you teach culture, and we
Hmm.
would train them how to teach culture based on giving them a cultural lesson. And so I ended up developing this whole lesson around lungi because it was this beautiful symbol of like there's nothing simpler than a wraparound piece of fabric. And for a country where men don't wear that, it doesn't look like it could be very complex. And through the course of this hour, we pull out, how complex it actually is, how cultural, the formality, the different ways you can wear it, how you can, if you're doing sport or a physical activity or bathing, there's just endless ways that you can tie it and use it in these creative ways that bring out the culture and the practicality of it. So that was a fun thing to get out to American teachers.
Yeah.
This is very common in South India. So I just pulled up pictures of lungis or lungis as we call it here, wearing it in different styles. So I had one question: do they wear anything underneath?
I mean, I don't know. I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope to, because in Ireland they wear these kilts, right,
Mm.
which are also like dress, and I've heard that they don't wear anything underneath. So I was wondering what is the situation
Well, what is
there.
funny is that you do learn that when you wear a lungi versus pants or shorts, there are different ways you have to move, and there are different ways you have to sit, and those are not immediately obvious, and so they do take time to be able to orient yourself for more appropriate ways to kind of behave with your body. And I'm telling this story because I remember this very funny incident when I brought over an American teacher to do some things, to do some programs for us, and he loved the lungi and would just would always be wearing it. But when we would have meetings, sometimes one meeting in particular with some important people, I just remember he was just sitting so inappropriately because he was sitting as if he was wearing shorts or pants. And I don't think he was showing real private regions, but it was just like kind of on the verge of that, and kind of like the lungi was kind of getting hiked up, and it was just like, okay, you really don't know like how you're supposed to move with your body while you're wearing this thing.
Very interesting. There's a version of that lower attire of man wore in India which solves that problem. It's called dhoti. And what happens is there's a cloth which goes from the middle. I'll show it in the image. So there's a cloth which goes from the middle. So you can actually sit like you're wearing a pant, but it's actually just a cloth tied around. Let me pull up a dhoti image. So till we're talking about dhoti, what is traditional or what is a Burmese typical or your favorite wedding ritual?
Uh, Weddings in Burma are very extra, I think, and it would span for like days, sometimes like weeks, depending on obviously like your income and how rich you are. It's a very status thing, and how many people you invite. Sometimes like there would be hundreds and hundreds of people that you don't know. It's actually like very similar to Indian culture as well, and there's like different ceremonies. So that's like the pre-engagement where you meet up with you court, you put the courting day where you court the wife with people in the neighborhood, and with this like ong, which is like bananas and like coconuts, and kind of like an offering. And then you go over the house to like ask for the wife from the man always. In terms of like payment and stuff like that, now it's become a little bit more modernized, and whoever wants to pay. But it used to be just the male. But we would have these like endless ceremonies and lavish um, food offerings. Some do vi- village side would be countryside. They would usually do it at monastery and then do donations and stuff like that. More of the city, a little bit more modernized, westernized,
How is a
I would say.
how does a Buddhist wedding work? In Hindu, there's a fire that you go around. You take turns of the fire, basically. But how is it in Burma and in Buddhist culture?
It's just offering the monks. Usually starts like super early in the morning, and then it's called Yizacha, which is before 6 a.m. I think. Like we have to get up super early in the morning, and then put the water into this little cup, and in a way it's like almost like a promise that the ceremony is like happening, or like legitimizing the ceremony in a way. And then later followed by breakfast and a lot of food, and offerings to the entire
Mhm.
monastery by the bride and the groom. Yeah.
This looks very similar to a friend's photo from Thailand. There were a lot of these precious items in front of them, and they were offering it to something or someone.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, this is very predominant Pama weddings, but there's also ethnic weddings as well. So, like, Shan weddings are pretty extravagant as well, which also involves a lot of donations and offerings, but it's more like gatherings with your entire village and feeding the entire village. But usually centers around like massive food, like you would slaughter a pig for hunting just for the wedding, or like made the groom go hunting and then have that kill. Like it varies depending on, yeah, the tribes and the ethics and their culture. So have you ever
Jumping
been
back to
to
the
a wedding,
dhoti,
Joa? Sorry, I asked a
You did.
question to Joa.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever been to a wedding?
Yeah, I actually went to a very rural wedding. I was living in the Sagaing Hills at the time, staying at a monastery, actually staying in a cave at a monastery, and there was a and the there was only several monks at the place I was staying, but they told me they'd been invited to some ceremony and asked me to join them. I wasn't a monk, but came with them and saw 30 monks that were being treated to breakfast, and then a wedding proceeded afterwards. It was not like the pictures you're showing. It was the community was more poor, and so it was very simple, but it was just beautiful, and it was great to be included in that, and to be included through the monks I was staying with. I They were invited to be served, and so I was kind of through their perspective and lens that I was understanding the ceremony. And I had been staying there for some months, so I had begun to know some of the villagers and some of the people as well. And so it was kind of nice being just away from the city, just feeling like I was being included in this rural community, and the experience with that. And but really, any endeavor you do in Myanmar, in Buddhist Myanmar, because of course there's different ethnic and religious traditions, but it involves monks. Someone you get married, someone is born, someone dies, you have a new business, you have a new home, you have a new car, you're taking a test. I mean, any number of things that you're doing involves wanting to make an offering to monks to have a store of merit, to get off to an auspicious start or an auspicious end, or an auspicious rebirth to whatever the next thing is. So many of these life events or business events involve monks. And actually, I should mention, when I was there, this memory is coming up to me. I hadn't thought of it forever, but when I was there in 2003, I learned that the Goenka family, who's still in Burma, they have a series of businesses. One thing they have is a travel agent office, and they were opening a new tourist office in 2003 when I was there, a new branch. And somehow the invitation of this new branch opening, somehow I heard about it and was invited, even though I was just a backpacker at the time staying at the center. And they opened their new branch by making an offering to monks and then asking anyone to come and meditate for an hour in the office before business hours started. And to me, that was just like such a thrill. I mean, everything was so new and exotic, and I was so dedicated to the practice, and just to be included in something like that, it was something I still remember. So.
we need to have more photos of the Shan and the rural weddings, because Google seems to be dominated by the fancy ones. It's not
Mm,
pulling up any
yeah.
traditional photos.
Those are
And
very rare ones.
as I'm seeing, I found this image. Can you tell us more about this long-necked Pagodan tribe woman wearing neck rings?
The Badown tribes, yeah. So they have these like really heavy gold rings, and the more there is, um, it shows their status. They have to put it since they're young, especially young girls, and because it's the ones who's been wearing for a long time, it holds like so much weight, and your leg is like actually elongated. So over the period of time, they cannot live without the gold rings. Yeah, the badao.
They cannot live without it.
Yeah, over there's, if you have to like wear that for years and years, your like your neck become elongated, and then you don't have that like gold support anymore. So yeah, um yeah.
It's like those people where, no, when you have a fracture in the neck or you get a band that you tie around and your neck is always straight. You cannot move it much. I feel they must be living the whole life through that.
Yeah, but it's also a show of their status, and yeah,
So is it just
yeah.
for the women or even the men do it?
Men do it too. Yeah,
Damn. I mean, I'm having a mixed reaction to this.
the Cayenne people.
Wow. This episode is brought to you by Tanmay Shah. That's me. Best way to support this show is by sharing this with your friends and dropping a comment and review on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. You can become my patron and a sponsor. That's not all. You can buy Rocklaz merchandise and NFTs and much more. See all the links in description for details. What is the best tourist activity to do in Burma?
Maybe not right now, tourists. Just like for
Hmm.
tourists, maybe not go there right now.
Yeah.
It's really not like, yeah.
Yeah, I could say more about
Yeah.
that too, because I'm thinking of a funny story I heard when, because tourism is pretty new there. Given again, it's hard to talk about kind of normal cultural things with Burma without the political entering into it, because it's entered into every facet of life. And tourism really kind of started tried to start in the 90s. They tried to the military tried to show their country as something normal and kick off a Visit Myanmar campaign in 96, and kind of took off after that. But the funny story that I was going to tell, which always cracks me up when I hear it, is I don't remember who told me this, someone who was around at the time, and they said that when you're talking about tourism, of course you could talk about international tourism or domestic tourism. Burmese are tourists themselves, and but when they're tourists, they would go to, when they would go to another place, they'll want to see, the main thing they want to see is pagodas. They just want to visit all the pagodas and hear all the stories and visit, know about the different architecture and history and such. And that's kind of the primary thing they do. And so when tourism first started in the 90s and 2000s, when the foreigners would come over, because that was what they did, that was how they organized tours. And they just had every day of going to see every pagoda in the area. And someone from that time was telling me that they were speaking to one of the tour operators and trying to intervene and saying, like, just because you like to do this, like these, non-Buddhist foreigners that getting really sick of just seeing pagodas all the time. You have to think about somewhere else to go. And it just wasn't in their mind to think, like, what in the world would tourists want to do except to pay homage and give reverence to different pagodas. And because of the lack of infrastructure, there's, even if you go to like Thailand or something, I mean, there's so much to do in Thailand. There's so many different kinds of things you could do for tourist infrastructure, depending on, any background you have, any type of person you are. And in the 2010s, those did start to develop. You would see, like food walking tours and coffee farms and jungle treks and bicycle trips. I mean, just kind of these inventive things. But before the 2010s, they're really, for tourism, they're international tourists, there really weren't much. I mean, I would really echo what Trish says very strongly, that now is not the time for tourists. It is going as a tourist is really legitimizing the military regime, which is bypassing the suffering of the people. But if we just try to answer this question generally and without the political overtone and not looking at going now, certainly there's so much history, and not just history of the Buddhist sites. There's Muslim, there's Christian, there's even Jewish history there. There's Sufi and Zoroastrianism and all kinds of different religions, religious imprints and historical imprints. There's so many different ethnic groups that have been there and have built things, you know, in their tradition, whether people from Armenia or Portugal or, you know, India or just all kinds of places you wouldn't necessarily expect. And some of those places aren't really known or developed. And so if you have a certain kind of interest or background, you do have to work hard to find those places, or to find a guide who can be creative enough to know, to find those places, because they don't really stand out. There's kind of a, you know, there's the normal places people go, which are Bagan, obviously. We could talk about some of the more normal places if you want to go that direction of Bagan or Inle Lake or Shredagon, or, you know, these kind of standard places which most tourists go to.
Wonderful. Hope things get changed and we can travel there. How do you appreciate something in Burmese? If you want to call somebody beautiful, or this art is beautiful, how would you say that?
Hey, Clare. Clare.
Clare.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
Clare is
beautiful. It means
beautiful.
pretty. Pretty, yeah. Pretty or beautiful, yeah.
All right. What is the first impression that comes to your mind when I say India? Trish.
For me it's the tea. Like, we have a huge culture of drinking, like we have a huge culture of tea shops, and the tea drinking culture comes from India for us during the British colonial time, and along with it the whole colonial thing brought in so much culture from India. So even our food, my dad's not Indian, like he's mixed Pakistani. So our family still eat a lot of like I was like Pakistani food, and biryani, for example, could be like we have our own different types of biryani. Our tea is like definitely come like a chai tea,
So
but
that
without the
is.
spices. Yeah.
Sorry, come again.
Like our tea is a really strong tea, like chai tea, but except without the spices. Yeah.
Never
It's so
call it
similar.
chai tea when you're
Oh, I
talking to
just
an
say
Indian.
chai. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
My bad.
So chai tea is like tea. Chai means tea.
Okay.
Your father, is he a Pakistani or Bangladeshi?
Pakistani. Yeah.
How did he come to Burma?
This
Was it
was
during the war?
during World War II. Yeah, and he was the great grandpa. And then he came to Burma as a soldier, and then he married a Chinese woman, and who's my great grandma, and yeah, from there.
But
So
there was no India Pakistan then during World War
sorry.
II. There was no India Pakistan during World War II.
It could have
Afterwards.
been. Yeah, it could have been. He could have been like there as like a tourist, or like kind of like part of the trade. He could have been there,
I think
but
it must be during
yeah.
the Bangladesh war, sort of. That time Bangladesh was a part of Pakistan, and then it was separated and became a new. This was in 70s, 60s or 70s, 1970s. But anyways,
Okay.
glad to know that
Yeah,
fun fact.
I'm not too sure, but yeah.
What are some less known facts? We spoke about so many things, Burmese. What are some less known and interesting facts? This is to any of you. Joe.
I think what's interesting for me is that sometimes Burma has this reputation of being so far away and so disconnected from other things and unassociated. And especially for me, doing a podcast about it, as well as reading a lot of books about it, you just find how many connections there are from stuff with Burma around the world that really astound you when you line them all up. And I'm not going to be able to recall them all off the top of my head, but just to give a couple that are coming to mind, well, just if you look at World War II and the Burma front, President Obama's grandfather fought in Burma in World War II.
Oh.
There was this Pan-African division of that that represented something like 20 African countries that were part of the British Empire that fought the Japanese in Burma. There's a book called Burma Boy, which is I can't remember the author's name, but it's about it's the story of an African soldier in Burma. But Obama's grandfather was an enlisted man who fought there. Another person who fought in the Burma front in World War II was Steven Spielberg's father. That might be somewhat interesting or coincidental in and of itself, but what makes this story even more interesting is that, and this blew me away, I was hearing a Fresh Air interview with Steven Spielberg, and he was recalling how his father's reunions with fellow American soldiers who served on the Burma front became the inspiration for him to start making movies, and particularly World War II movies. And so Steven Spielberg, one of the greatest filmmakers of our time, who reinvented the genre, was inspired by and started his passion by hearing Burma war stories from his father and his parents' generation. That's what kicked this whole journey off. Those are just a couple of examples that come to mind of all these connections you don't expect. Other ones are coming to me now as I talk. Burma was very rich in natural resources and was exploited once the British colonial period came in. Among the many people who had interest there, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, we could easily do the research on this, I believe it was Herbert Hoover, the American president. Before he was president, he had a silver mine in Burma. And he was there to as a very young person from a privileged family there. I believe I've seen a picture of him in Burma next to a silver mine in like the early 20th century. So there's all these like little pieces of facts and connections that whether you're looking in the last 100 years or last 500 years of how connected Burma has been with the world and how connected the world has been with Burma.
Everybody knows the neighbors, Thailand, everybody knows Vietnam and people around. But I have observed wherever there is a military dictator, that place goes sort of dark on the internet. Nobody's talking about it. You don't hear about anything. And people don't even know that it exists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the sad part. But
Yeah,
glad through the podcast, we are getting insights of Myanmar. Thank you for doing that.
And what you said goes along with my point, where what you said beautifully is that when a dictator comes along, the country goes dark. And so I think that the temporary darkness and closed off nature that Myanmar has been only recently, it makes us forget about how connected Burma was to the world in so many ways before that. And so it's so good to remember these things.
Wow. You do this, is this a full-time thing? The Insight Myanmar podcast and the blogs that you write, Joe?
Yes, it's a full-time thing, but it's not just that. It's the blogs, the media in general. We also have Burmese language podcast. The media in general is part of the Better Burma nonprofit, and which also engages in humanitarian missions, as in Mizoram and the schools that we're building in Mizoram.
So your whole life revolves around Burma. Everything that you're doing for living as well as in general is about Burma and Myanmar. Is that right?
Well, yeah. I mean, when I was actually stuck, I was living my full life in Myanmar, and I took a trip home to visit family right before the pandemic happened. So I was stuck in America with the pandemic, waiting to go back to Burma. I just packed a bag, and then the pandemic stretched, and then after the pandemic, the coup happened. So I've also been displaced with a 3-week trip turning into many years now. But when the coup hit in 2021, because I had something of a platform with meditation, I had attracted something of a following of different meditators who were following things I was writing and sharing. When the coup first hit, I established a nonprofit to be able to legally collect donations from those who trusted me and wanted to support vulnerable communities. At the time, it just seemed like, maybe a few weeks or a few months. we'll just kind of get the money that we can, and we'll go to support, urgent humanitarian stuff. I don't think at that time anyone really thought that this resistance and carnage would be going on for so long. So that was just the start of it. But then as things progressed and we realized how long this was going to be, the kind of emergency response of creating the nonprofit became like, okay, well, this needs to have a bit more structure, needs to have deeper roots. How is this going to be sustainable? What is really our mission? And after a year, started to look at more of these fundamental issues that weren't really looked at when it was just being formed urgently to meet a pressing need. And so that's grown into, it's grown into a full-time thing, whether it's doing podcasts or media, whether it's doing fundraising or campaigns, whether it's sending the money to the different projects and following up with how that those funds are used, and making sure it gets there, and following up with that, or things that are behind the scenes that we're all doing.
So day in and day out, you're controlling, you're facilitating for social cause in Burma. What is the most difficult challenge in your work?
The first year was really difficult. It was really emotional because I had never had the experience of having something so terrible happen to people I cared about, and knowing where I fit into that. And it was, even though I was in safety, it was very traumatic. I had emotional breakdowns and kind of mental disassociation between the safe life I was living and the privilege around me, and the stories of what was happening in Myanmar. Not just the stories. I mean, sometimes people would call me with life or death situations for themselves or others, and because I was building a network, sometimes it'd be, midnight, and I would get a call and someone needed a safe house. And I happened to know someone who had a safe house. And so, how do I make this connection for someone who's literally on the run, and make sure that all sides are safe and trusted, and manage how to do this. And the emotional component of fitting into that role was something I just had never been a part of before. And so that was, the trauma of that first year, and kind of managing those two worlds. One of the stories I tell is that on one occasion I was talking to an American friend, and there was this fantasy series of books that he loved, and they were turning the series into a TV show. And he said to me something like, I'm so worried that they're going to blow the TV show, and it's going to kind of ruin my childhood fantasy books that I love. And I didn't know how to respond to that, because I was in a situation where, when you begin the sentence, I'm so worried that, you don't finish the sentence by talking about a TV show. You're so worried about, life and death matters. And on one hand, I wanted to attend to my friend's, what he was saying, and not just kind of be, kind of say like, well, I can't be bothered with a TV show. I'm concerned about, much more important things. I want to be able to attend to him and keep the friendship. But it's also so trivial, because I'm having conversations with other people where it really is life or death, and there really are decisions and connections I'm making that are trying to help them, that it was a disassociation. And it took me a year to really be able to know how to talk to friends and family over here about very mundane things, and kind of attend to them, and not bring, every conversation, say, the next terrible thing that happened in Myanmar, be able to attend to them, even though sometimes I didn't really care about it. And while also being present for, and serving as much as I could the ongoing crisis there, and being able to manage that. So,
Amazing. Hats off to you. What are your plans with Insight Myanmar for the next 5-10 years?
My goal for Insight Myanmar, and where it's developing, the direction we're going in, I want it to be the critical hub for conversation and voices to come together, and for people to, I think that every perspective is a different piece of the puzzle for how people talk and share. I'm a trainer by profession, so I believe in the miracle of communication. I think that you can be transformed by having honest dialogue that really gets deep into things, and that involves active listening and really understanding the other person, and it also and diversity is a big part of it. Not just diversity of the guests that you have on, but also diversity of the host. And we're working to try to bring in more hosts from different backgrounds to also guide the conversations, because different hosts are going to guide the conversation with guests in different ways. And really to have a platform that's far beyond me and my own limitations and biases, but something that can transcend that and can be a place where people can talk at length, in without a time constraint of having to just kind of say the catchphrases or the main points, but to really unpack who they are. And and I think with Myanmar also, it's a place of contrasting histories, contrasting legacies, different perspectives. There's not one objective view of what happened and what's happening now. And anyone who tells you that they can give you the straight story is probably biased in what they don't understand. And so the thing, something I'll also say is that sometimes listeners who find us after 3 or 4 episodes will say, oh, I really enjoy listening to this. I'm really understanding Myanmar, and this is helping me kind of understand what's going on. And then after 10 to 15 episodes, they'll say, I'm totally lost. I'm totally confused, because then they start to hear different things that don't add up. And yes, that's the point. It's not to give you an answer, but it's to show you these conflicting and contrasting realities so that you can critically examine and explore and involve yourself in this evolving story and figure out who you are and what you believe. So that's Insight Myanmar. Better Burma is the nonprofit. That I wasn't answering the question in terms of the humanitarian missions we're doing. We're also engaged in that, but more focused just on the dialogues that we hope to have. I think that Myanmar has really been a victim in the international media of reductionist stories. It's the lady versus the generals. It's the monks versus the military. It's black or white. And Myanmar is not a black or white country. And so if we can, and when you only have 5 minutes for a TV show or a radio or 1,000 words for an article, how can you possibly get into the nuance? If you don't understand the nuance, how can you possibly understand what's going on? And I like long form. I don't like 20-minute podcasts. I like to listen to 2-hour podcasts. That's who I am. I don't like to read articles. I like to read books. And so I wanted to create something where we can bring an audience along who would stay with us. And, now we have 70,000 people who listen in. We have people in embassies and government, celebrities, journalists, academics. And that's just lovely to me, because we're in the ear of the right people who are able to educate and inform and engage them, not by my vast amount of knowledge, but by this diversity of guests. Each of them, Trish coming from her background, all the 180 other people you referenced on the other shows that can come and with their little piece of the puzzle can just nudge a little bit. It's not quite how you think. It's not quite how this headline portrays. This is the deeper stuff beyond. And to be this critical hub of dialogue that can involve all of us, not give an authoritative understanding of what's happening, but bring these contrasting legacies and histories so that we can all be involved in the complexity of it.
Beautiful. I love the point that you made, reductionist view of media and how simplified things they make. How were you able to develop interest of listeners? 70,000. Burma is a place nobody knows where it is on the map, and still there's a podcast dedicated to that, talking to hundreds of people, to hundreds of people. How were you able to gather listeners or spark interest for people to know stories from Myanmar?
It's something I've really worked consciously at. And I think that the first, as I mentioned, the trauma that I went through the first year of what was happening, where I fit into it, there was a sense, especially in the first few months, of kind of like banging on doors, like, you need to care about this. People are being killed and raped and airstrikes and torture, and you need to know about this, and quickly realized that this was important to me because I was so connected to the country. It wasn't reasonable to expect that people were going to respond that way. terrible things are happening in Syria and Sudan, and I'm myself not really following or that worried because I don't have that connection. So why should I expect that of Myanmar? So it made me realize that I have to find these hooks. What are these, instead of saying you should care because bad things are happening, how can I appeal to self-interest and to little niche communities that care about certain things and say, well, if you care about this, then let's understand what's happening in Myanmar. And that could mean, well, certainly meditation, engaged Buddhism, spiritual practice. If you care about anything involving Buddhism or meditation, here's why you should care about Myanmar. Here is how Buddhism is being perverted on one side, and here is how meditation is supporting the mental health and the ethical values of the democratic movement on the other. But then also, like LGBT, can we bring in those voices and have them speak about how they're working towards greater inclusion and rights? And so if you care about LGBT anywhere in the world, this is why you should care about Myanmar. What about gender equality? What about hip hop? What about graffiti? What about art? What about Lithwe, which is the Burmese martial arts? We had Dave Leduc as a guest, who's the only foreign Lithwe martial art champion, who talked about that. What about Christian ethnic communities? What about Christian missionaries? What about filmmakers? All of these things, and whatever the field or the voice is, if you care about these things, these champions of these particular fields, in the case of Trish, food, if you're a foodie, if you're a chef, if you care about ethnic cuisines, how can we take those stories and tell it in a very Myanmar way, but then connect to people who might not care so much about Myanmar, but they care about meditation, or care about gender equality or hip hop. And we can show them that if you care about this thing, this practice is happening in Myanmar with stakes that you can't possibly imagine in your countries. It's being used to challenge a despotic regime and stand for whatever this practice is that you care so much about in the most courageous and creative and amazing ways. And that story's not being told. And so, how can we find those pockets of people, expand our network to meet those interesting representatives of those practices? And then once we do the interviews, reach out to the hip hop communities, the Christian communities, the LGBT communities, whatever they are, and bring them in, and then hope that once they listen to that episode, they'll stay for the next one. They'll come and listen to Trish because they care about food. And they're like, this is pretty interesting. The next guest is talking about, I don't know, art. Let me stay for that one and hear that one as well. So that's been our strategy.
Amazing. To get in a level deeper, this is some great marketing tips. Can you give a couple of actionable tips? I have this community. Suppose I've recorded the food episode with Trish. Where do I find the listeners for it? How do I go and invite them to come and listen to this particular episode in the vastness of the internet where attention has become a currency?
Is that a question to me?
Yes.
Part of it is building a subscriber base. Once people hit that subscribe button, then they just, as I'm sure they get what's in your feed. And so, they're locked in. So just doing whatever you can to encourage that subscription. When I have time, which hasn't been recently, but when I've had time, I've found Facebook groups that, care about food in general, or in the case of her, or Burmese food, or, whatever else. And I'll share it there, although I haven't done that lately. It's a silly thing, but obviously, hashtags and locations matter as well, and tagging people, that matters. One of the other things we do a lot of is we have a volunteer, I wouldn't say a team because they're a bit amorphous, but we're always looking for volunteers. And one of the tasks I give volunteers is to find creative ways to bring out the content from the guests. They make quotes, they make templates, they make posts. And so we're constantly repurposing the information. So someone actually might never listen to Trish's interview, but through our social media channels and how we put it out, they'll hear some of the things she says. They might hear a 5-minute excerpt or a 10-slide template story that's kind of, actually, it's funny we mentioned this. It's so ironic because just 10 minutes before this interview, a volunteer she makes template stories, 10 slides per interview, telling one part of the story. And she chooses whatever interview she wants. The last interview she chose was Trish. She said, I want to do that one next. 10 minutes before the interview, she sent me those templates. I haven't even looked at them yet. They're still sitting there. After I was going to look at them and then share them with Trish so she could share them as well. But that's just one example of a Burmese volunteer. In this case, she listened to Trish's interview, and she made, in Trish's case, she made actually 3 different packages of 10 template slides. I don't even know what the theme is because I haven't seen it yet. But we, we just find these kind of creative ways to give a 1-minute slice or a quote or a picture or something else that will, hopefully lead the person to the interview. But if it doesn't do that, at least they'll have 1 minute where they hear some words that she says. Maybe they hear Trish say, "I'm concerned not just about Bamar cuisines, but also ethnic cuisines." Well, that's a very powerful statement. I mean, that in and of itself, for someone who knows Myanmar culture, and to hear that there's not just Bamar cuisines, but also ethnic cuisines, even if they don't listen to the interview, that's planting a seed. So that's the kind of strategy we've also had in getting out there. And I should
Very
mention too, we have connections. Sorry, one more thing. We have partnerships with both Radio Free Asia as well as Mizima, which is the biggest kind of local media. And both of them now share our content. Radio Free Asia literally streams our interviews through their radio and through their internet. So aside from that's outside of our analytics, I don't know how many people that reaches. And Mizima runs an article a week based on our interviews, and puts it in their magazine as well. So I'm a networker. I've found ways to connect within those networks to just have more and more reach, because I'm all about, how do we, number one, break through to people who wouldn't traditionally care about Myanmar and try to show them why they should care. And number two, those people already in the Myanmar bubble, how do we inform them greater? Inform them not from my source of knowledge or authority, but from all these things guests are saying. How do we put little drops so that they already care, but how do we just inform them, not so they care more, but so they think about it in a more nuanced and intelligent way?
Beautiful. I also love the fact that you mentioned diversity of hosts. That is the first time I was hearing it. Getting diverse. So we are doing diversity of countries and ethnicities, and diversity of hosts would be something interesting, asking questions from different perspectives. I also want to compliment your website and blog. I mean, it's so good, so nicely everything is mentioned, the flow of information, and easy to play and listen to the episode right there. No need to go anywhere else. And transcripts, even for Trish, after the episode, it has a good brief about everything. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'll put the links, guys. Check it out.
Great.
Let's go to the signature round. This question is for Joe. Name 3 people, living or dead, that you would like to have lunch with.
Well, first would be my grandfather. He's my he's passed away, but he's just been a moral and ethical example that's guided me my whole life. Just a generous and compassionate and beautiful man, that I still think about to this day. The second would, this is probably not too creative, but being someone who came to Burma through meditation, I'd certainly like to meet the Buddha and be able to gain from his wisdom. And just because it's on my mind, because I referenced him earlier, the mind is just kind of going to Lady Sayadaw. He's this important 19th century monk that really, I think, this whole worldwide mindfulness movement that is going everywhere right now, a lot of it came from the seeds that Lady Sayadaw planted. And he was just so, I think what I really admire about him was how flexible he was. And you often don't see that with religious teachers. They usually are more narrow in what they're trying to promote. And Lady was the opposite. He was so brilliant and developed himself, but he was not trying to force a way of thinking on others. It was the other way around. He was trying to adapt his understanding of that thinking so that it was applicable and relevant and helpful, whether you were a Western Christian or scientist or a 10-year-old Burmese girl, that there were ways for you to engage with this. And I think that kind of thinking is just really inspiring.
Imagine now you're sitting for the lunch in the restaurant of Trish with your grandfather first. What question would you ask him?
My grandfather? Oh my gosh. I don't know. What question would I ask him? I because I'm a grandson, and I'm used to that. I'd probably want to tell him what I've been doing. Probably kind of selfish, but as someone who asks a lot of questions and as a podcaster, if I was with my grandfather, I'd probably want to say, "Let me tell you everything I've been doing since we last talked 15 years ago or whenever it was." And he was the best listener I've ever encountered in my life. Actually, there's one Burmese monk who I'm very close to. He reminds me of my grandfather. He's this Burmese monk who's in Sagaing Hills. He was the one I referenced earlier in the story who went to the wedding. He has many traits similar to my grandfather. It's why I'm so drawn to both of these, and they've been such inspiring figures in my life. They're such good listeners. They open things up in you that encourage you to talk and be yourself. And so I think if I was with my grandfather, I would just say, I can't wait to tell you everything that I've done since last time.
But what about asking? What question would you ask a listener, good listener?
Someone who was a good listener, what question I would ask them?
Like your grandfather and the monk you mentioned.
I would ask both of them lots of questions. And this,
if you had to ask.
I'm sorry.
Top question.
Top question. I would ask them a personal question. I would ask them a hard question. That I would want to be able to understand their thinking. I did ask many hard questions to the monk. I asked the monk questions about sexuality, about how as a monk he was able to handle defilements, whether it was sexuality, whether it was greed or self-confidence or other things. And this monk, very atypical of many monks I would speak to me very honestly about his own defilements, his own negativities, and how he would look inside himself and work inside himself to understand them.
All right. Now it's the Buddha sitting with you in Trish's restaurant. What is one question? Like give me just one question that you'd ask him.
What did you really teach? Everyone today is trying to say, this is what the Buddha really taught. This is what he really meant. So I would just want to say, in your own words, in modern language that we can understand, what did you really teach?
And now this is for Trish. Buddha and Joe are sitting in your restaurant. What would you serve them?
It's a lot of merit serving the Buddha.
What would I be serving? I mean, depending on whatever they want to eat, I guess. Like, but Buddha was like, interesting. I never
these
really
are monks.
thought
They
of
don't
it.
ask for anything. These are monks, right? They don't ask for anything. You have to give.
Yeah.
So what would be the first thing you would give?
I would actually want to feed Buddha like a cheeseburger and see what he thinks about it. I would be like, you probably have never had this before. Let me see what you think of this. Yeah, that's what I would give. A cheeseburger.
And how do you think you would react to that?
I mean, I have no idea. Probably some kind of like a shock, I guess, or like I don't know. It's probably his first time eating cheese. I'm pretty sure.
How do you think, Joe, how do you think you would react eating a cheeseburger? Like
how would I react or how would the Buddha react?
How would Buddha react eating a cheeseburger?
I don't know if he would react. I think I think he would be very mindful in examining the taste and the textures and not have cravings or aversions would be my guess.
Interesting answer. Now the third person, monk lady, right? How do you spell that name?
Ledi.
Okay, lady. What question would you ask the monk lady?
I have a very clear question I would ask him. I would ask him if he encouraged the practice of meditation, and since his encouragement, that practice of meditation has then become separated from the rest of what we call Buddhism, and and study and other practices associated with it. And even though the meditation center today was probably an outgrowth of Lady Sayadaw's thoughts and works, that we have a center devoted only to meditation, I don't know if that's what he intended. And that's what I would want to ask him. I would say to him, you definitely had the desire to have more people meditate, and you did that in revolutionary ways. But now people are accessing mindfulness and meditation separated from everything else among the Buddhist teachings and even the monkhood and everything else. I would ask him, how do you feel about this? Do you think this is a positive development, or do you think that there's some risk here that we're losing some essence? That's the burning question I would have for him.
Talking about the desires and to continue on your line, I wonder how would Buddha and his disciples think about desire, because in Christianity and Islam there were crusaders who just went out and tried to convert everybody whom they could find into their religions. But I don't hear those stories from Buddhists, like forcefully converting, you either die or become Buddhist. You'll never hear that. So, and for them also personally, wanting everybody to do meditation or follow the Buddhist path is a desire, right? And they usually, Buddha and what from my teaching is they let go of all desires. How would they deal with this contradiction? What do you think, Joe?
Well, Islam and Christianity have built into the religion this message that we need to for conversion. I mean, conversion is a part of the belief in the Savior and how they go along proselytizing. Obviously, in Judaism and Buddhism, you don't have that same message that's there, so it doesn't have that kind of the Crusades or conversion drive. That being said, within Myanmar, the military has done really terrible things to try to promote their faith, and tearing down, destroying churches and Christian crosses and building pagodas in places where Buddhists don't live. And they're not necessarily forcibly converting people, but they're making a nationalistic show of their religion. And there are monastic schools that care for the poor and for orphans, and some of them have a secular education, but some of them, do start to try to convert or to ordain the members, the kids. That's in Myanmar. But to answer your second part of the question, I historically, and like within Buddhism, for those that are sharing the practice of meditation or the practice of Buddhism, I think there's a feeling among Buddhists that the truths that the Buddha pointed to, they are, the truth of cause and effect, of karma, of rebirth, of these different things. They're true whether you believe in Buddhism or not. Having more followers is not going to make these essential truths more real. They're already there. There's a feeling that if more people can learn about these truths that exist, they'll act in accordance with them and their lives will be better and they'll be happier. And so, but they have to have a seed for it. You can't force something on someone that doesn't have a seed for it. So and that's why Lady Sayadaw was so profound, because he was so flexible in the way that he was able to bring people to it through their own volition and find their own place. And so I think that that you can't force someone, you can't bring someone to conform to this, but you can create conditions where they can learn a practice or a way of life where they can act with more knowledge and more wisdom in ways that will essentially make them feel more balanced and make them feel better about themselves if they choose to. But that depends on the teacher, it depends on the student, and it depends on the time and the conditions as well. You can't force any of those things.
Amazing. One question that came to my mind, I love this chant. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. What is the meaning of that? One of our guests from Canada had become a little sentimental because he had traveled to Tibet and India for 5 years to gain this. learnings. And I love this because when I visited Ladakh, this was always playing, and I really got attached with this. What is the meaning of this?
I don't know. I mean, that's not. I don't believe that's Pali. You don't ever hear that in Burma.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it's part of a Tibetan or Mahayana practice. I've heard it in Nepal as well. I also really like it. The first time I heard it, I was one of the first spiritual experience I ever had in high school was a guy in a park in Oregon chanting not the whole phrase, but just And I don't know how much of that is Buddhist per se, but it
No,
had
no,
a
no.
profound effect on me.
Om Om is a multi-religious thing, mostly Hindu, and it's
Yeah.
just Om. It's not a part of any phrase. It's just the word. Om
Hmm.
Mani Padme Hum is a different chant. It's more
Hmm.
like a prayer.
Hmm.
But it's interesting to know that Tibetan and Nepali Buddhism is quite significantly different from the Burma or
Yes.
Myanmar Buddhism.
Yes. Very different.
What what are some highlighting features of the Burma Buddhism by which people can recognize, okay, this is Burmese Buddhism? What would you say?
Well, I mean, the examples you give, that's Mahayana. So the difference between Mahayana and Theravada would be extreme. I mean, those are almost different religions. If you're comparing two Theravada countries, like, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Burma, all follow Theravada Buddhism. So they're much more similar, but there's very distinct cultural differences between them. But when you're comparing Theravada Buddhism anywhere to Mahayana Buddhism anywhere, there's a huge divergence. But in terms of your second question, how would you characterize Burmese Buddhism? Trish, what do you think? Turn it over to you.
I mean, it's definitely the Theravada route but the predominant Burma Buddhism, and I think as I was growing up, I don't come from a very religious family. My mom is probably the only one who's religious, so like, from what I understand, as I was growing up, is that she would categorize like Burmese Buddhism as like the Theravada, and then a practice is a bit more stricter and a bit more like the Buddha way, like they like to claim it to, and so it's the middle way. That's what they say. Everything is the middle way, and everything is all about the stuff that like human life in general. It's tied to sufferings,
Mhm.
and the only way to get enlightened is to do meditation and then do good deeds. And at one point, if you do enough, then you will be enlightened, both in human form and also as part of after death experience as well, and the whole like
You know,
reincarnation process as well. Yeah.
many of the listeners, including me, might not have heard the word Mahayana and Theravada because they just know Buddhism is one. So this is an homework for you guys. Go and comment what is the difference you find between these two sects, as you may call. On a lighter note, yeah, go ahead, Joe. You're saying
Yeah, well,
something.
generally speaking, Theravada, I think, literally means like the teachings of the elders, and Theravada tries to adhere more so to the original teachings of the Buddha 2,500 years ago. I think they would claim that that's all they do, which isn't exactly true, but they definitely are more attuned to the records and the scriptures of the Buddha's actual life. Mahayana came later, and that was more of a practice of as Buddhist teachings started to spread through Tibet and China, Japan, Vietnam. They started to become combined with local beliefs, and so, like, in Tibet, you had um, it's pre-Buddhist mythology, cosmic mythology of gods and myths and everything else. And I don't know very much at all about Tibetan Buddhism, but from what I've heard, and with the other forms as well, it they the kind of inspiration of Buddhist teachings combined with the existing mythology to create a hybrid that was new. And I think one of the real distinctions of Mahayana as well, at least when it was formed, was Mahayana means big basket, and they refer to themselves as big basket, and Theravada they called Hinayana, which was small basket. That's kind of an offensive term. So these days you usually don't hear Mahayana Hinayana, you usually hear Mahayana Theravada. But their feeling was that the Hinayana or Theravada practice was too constricted, where only a very few number of people were able to gain liberation, and they were looking for a practice that would open up to everyone for being taking a bodhisattva vow, where I'm not going to get liberated until the whole world is liberated. That's kind of the basic textbook definition, but it's a lot more complicated from there. I mean, like Burma claims it's a pure Theravada lineage country, but that's not true. There have been so many Hindu advisors of the different kings that had all these rituals. There's beliefs in nats and devas, and there's wizards that are kind of outside of the fold, and there are Mahayana influences. I mean, they look at Bagan 1,000 years ago as kind of like the glory of Theravada coming to Burma, but like Mahayana was before that, Mahayana was after that. There have been influences that have been there. So it's like anything where there's kind of a main story that you hear, but then as you get deeper into that story, you realize the nuances that this goes back to long form, right? I mean, these aren't the headlines; they're not the short 5-minute clip. But kind of once you go deeper into it, you realize how complex this actually is. But still, the breakdown is that for the most part, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Burma are Theravada countries that adhere much more to the original words of the Buddha, whereas Tibet, Japan, China, Vietnam are more Mahayana countries where the Buddhist teachings have combined with local belief many thousands of years ago.
Mm-hmm. So it's north and south in a way, if you see. But yeah, I would love to know and hear about Sri Lanka, and as you say about this, both these sects. What I see and what is common between them is practice of meditation, right? Both of them believe in meditation. And just a fun question: how many hours do you meditate, Joe?
Well, I would say Mahayana believes in meditation first, just to say that. I mean, it's Christian meditation if you want to go there as well. I mean, meditation is a part of any Buddhist practice. It's just the type of meditation that one is doing. But you get a lot more complex there too. So it's that's a whole other conversation. In terms of the hours I do, when I was originally a student of Goenka, which I'm not anymore, I would religiously do 2 hours a day minimum, sometimes 2 or 3 hours. I became very inspired in Burma by one teacher, Sayadaw U Tejaniya, who's a disciple of Shwe Min Sayadaw. And he teaches in a very non-traditional way, very non-formal, where he doesn't care if you're sitting or not. He sees practice as something you do in every moment, whether you're talking or eating or in the toilet or taking a walk or working. And so, and that really broke down the formal and informal practices of mindfulness, where it wasn't like I'm on now and I'm off. And even being in Burma did that. I mean, often Western meditators would come and they'd ask me, how many hours are Burmese monks really meditating? And I would say, well, you have to unpack that question, because you might have an idea of formal meditation, but what about the alms round? For 30 or 60 minutes, they're generating metta, loving kindness to all or they should be doing that. That's what their role is, to all of the donors that are giving them rice. That's mental cultivation. If that's not meditation, what is? When they're chanting suttas, when they're making offerings, when they're eating and they're mindful of the food and appreciating the donors who gave them that food. These are all aspects of mental cultivation. And if mental cultivation isn't meditation, what is? And so I think in the West, we have more of a sense of this is an act of meditation, this is real life. And in Burma itself, but particularly the teachings of U Tejaniya, who's unconventional even in Burmese Buddhism, he's a very unconventional teacher, really broke down the categories of kind of what is practice and what isn't.
So in Uttejaniya, you just have a mindfulness in everything you're doing? How do you?
He doesn't have a formal technique, which also differentiates him. Or like Goenka, it's like first you do this, then you do this, then you do this. To say it simply, U Tejaniya advises you to pay attention to the six sense doors. And
Six
the
sense
six
doors.
sense doors are smell, taste, touch, thought. Thought is a sense door. Usually we say five senses in the West, but in Burma we have six, and Buddhism you have six. Hearing, seeing, and he encourages you to pay attention not to the objects but to the act of observing. And so
Hmm.
if you just take one example, if you look at sight, I see a bird. The bird is not important. That's the object is not important. What's important is the moment of awareness and mindfulness of the contact where I'm seeing that bird, and I'm aware that I'm mindful. And so I could be, when you look at mindfulness this way, every moment we have objects coming into contact with our six sense doors. Every moment. We're either ignorant of them, or if we're not ignorant, then we're liking or disliking them. And then when you like and dislike, then you endlessly, according to Buddhist teachings, you're on the path of suffering and ignorance, because you're constantly trying to keep the things you like and push away the things you don't like. And so when you're aware of the act of observing objects from these six sense doors, you could be aware that I'm observing a bird, and then aware of the feeling that arises through that observation of the bird. What feeling is coming up through that? Am I bothered? Am I joyful? Am I indifferent? Do I have memories? And so just being aware of the contact with all of these objects through our six sense doors, and then what the mind then does after this
Hmm.
contact, and just observing that process taking place, not trying to change it, not trying to psychoanalyze it, not trying to reflect on it, but just being aware moment to moment of the six sense doors, which you can do in any position. You could do when you're talking, when you're working, anything. It's not like a formal practice, like, observing the breath or the sensations or the abdomen or something like that. It's naturally observing the objects that your six sense doors take in, no matter what you're doing.
I might have a very relatable experience very recently as well. And then to me, like that's why like cooking for me really just like when it comes to meditating is really, I can't meditate because I have ADHD, and then every single time I sit down in one place, like there's so many multiple voices in my head. So the only way for me is to get my mind busy and focus on a lot of things, which is why I think cooking is extremely effective for someone like me. And just only recently, with me, because I worked in like very high pressure kitchen before, everything, every second counts. So that is after many years, and you do like 10 hours of like extreme um laser focus, which is a type of meditating and also mindfulness. Everything that you do, you have to pay attention to it. And then just recently, while I was doing deep frying, which I think I'm going to do a food content relating to that and meditation, is that the amount of moisture in the certain things and the bubbles and how it's bubbling, the sound of it, and you have to pay so much attention to it, is that to avoid uh burning it, you have to pay attention to all the things that's happening to the deep frying. And it's such a beautiful process for me, is because not only am I like observing it, but I'm also manipulating the process in a way that learning how the oil works, learning how the temperature of the water, the learning how the starch content in this potato and blah 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 blah, like all of these like small little minute things, is that I'm able to
Break it down.
break it down and block out everything else that does not matter, and then I'm living in that moment of like observing
Hmm.
completely, and then reacting based on the observation. And it's such a beautiful therapeutic, like I'm the most calmest when I'm frying things, which is the weirdest thing to say, but it is, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
There's another thing that happens when you are in proximity or spend even few hours with these monks, it changes even without talking, right? I have experienced this personally. People who have been meditating no matter what, but it just like they even tested it out. They put them in a MRI and they saw these rays, gamma or something was very high for them, even when they are not meditating. So it is always great to be or get in touch with some monks or a person like that. How would you categorize that person? He may or may not be a monk, but somebody who's like enlightened. I don't know, is that's the word or no, but
Yeah, I mean, I think my grandfather wasn't Buddhist, but he was a saintly person, and people who came in contact with him, even strangers, were moved and affected just by how quiet he was, and just the goodness you felt emanating from him. I think that transcends religion. That the right I think that becoming a monk isn't magical. It can make you, it can mess you up and actually, not necessarily improve you, but it can also give you the conditions to develop internally in a way that lay life can't. I think that's true. I was going to comment to what Trish said, that U Tejaniya is so unique because this is crazy, but he refined his meditation he's a Chinese Burmese, and his family had a stall in a market, a very busy Yangon marketplace. And he practiced intensely in that market as a layperson and applied his teachings of Shui Min Sayadaw with the Six Sense Doors. He would be, doing a million things in a moment, like in the marketplace of handling all these different orders. But he was everything he did, he was developing his awareness of his Six Sense Doors meticulously. And he was and as Trish said, she came from ADHD background. He was a drug addict, as a kid. and
oh,
and so he was, his mind was kind of going a million miles a minute and looking for outlets. In my own personal case, when I did Goenka, I have a very critical, active mind, and Goenka was difficult for me because there wasn't a place for me to bring my full self into the practice. I needed to focus on breath, and when the mind went to different places, bring it back to breath, bring it back to breath, bring it back to breath. And I was successful to a degree, but it was also like I can't. The place where this mind is going, I have to rein that in. And U Tejaniya was so liberating for me because it was like, my mind can be whatever it wants to be. It can go wherever it wants to go. There's no place that is not allowed. I just have to be mindful as it's going there. And that blew my mind after 15 years of reining the mind in to focus on breath, to have the freedom to be able to let the mind go to all these crazy places, but not be ignorant, to follow it and to observe what it was doing and why it was doing it. And that was just, there were moments where, like, as U Tejaniya was, he gives one example of one time being at a wedding reception. He's a monk now, but as a layperson. And when the reception ended, he was kind of stuck in the hall and everyone had left. And for some reason, he couldn't leave for like an hour. And this loud techno music was blaring, and he was so irritated by it, but he directed his mind to observe it. And so he was observing these techno beats and observing, the contact of the sound to his ear, and then his dislike, and reflecting on that. And so, like, this just kind of showed you how, like, mindfulness and wisdom can come anywhere, anytime, and you have to direct your mind in those moments. And I've just never heard another teacher talk like that. So it was very, very inspiring, and gave you a lot of freedom for what you could do with the practice.
beautiful. I'm following a similar practice by Art of Living. Their philosophy is also on the same lines. Meditation is not about focusing or controlling, it's about letting loose and accepting things as. So, Sahaj Samadhi and Sudarshan Kriya have been very beneficial for me. So, listeners, you can try out both and explore. Going to lighter questions, Trish, which is your one secret ingredient?
Secret ingredient to any of my cooking, or like just in life?
Yeah, food.
Food
Back on food. As
related?
you are a chef, yeah, what
Okay.
is the secret ingredient?
Oh man, that's hard. I guess this is a little bit philosophical, I guess. Sedana, which is the act of giving, which is also what Joa noted earlier. And I think as I was growing up too, because my mom was a very religious person, um, I have been kind of conditioned into thinking in the act of giving. So my secret
How?
ingredient and why I like cooking is that like the act of giving all my 100%, 150% in the food that I cook and
Hmm.
being extremely generous and yeah, in
To
everything
what you're giving to the food.
to the food.
And what
Yeah.
about the food itself? Like, what is the secret ingredient in the food itself, in your preparation, or what is something that you use that you love the most? That's your favorite, or you cannot see a food without it.
Yeah, that's hard. Probably like fermentation, I guess. Any I
Okay.
would I'm a big fan of slow cooking food just in general and putting so much time in the food that I cook. And I think fermentation is such a beautiful process that things that you cannot control and seeing it like let it it's kind of like a beast watching it roam by himself and you're just creating an environment for it to flourish in the direction that it wants to
Hmm.
grow safely. And I think I applied that to my life now as well. And
You
I
are
think
fermenting your life.
I am fermenting my own life, like sour girl forever. I
Let's
literally
go.
carried my different yeast all the way from Burma to here. Like that's like my thing. Like I carried my own sourdough starter, and I've got also got these like pickle jars and my little SCOBY. So that was all in my luggage, and like a bunch of black garlic, and it was yeah. Other people
That's
pack clothes. I
amazing.
pack like my little mothers.
So there are
That
cats
rem-
and rabbits on the plane, and you with your fermentation stuff. That's
There's
dedication. That's awesome.
this there's got to be some kind of bacteria.
That's so
Little
awesome.
little pet bacteria.
Mhm.
yeah, bacteria are pets. Like, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
fresh way to look at it. I have a community of pets and their bacteria.
Yeah.
Joe, how to make money?
How to make money? What do you mean?
That's a question. That's a signature question that we ask everybody.
How to make money? I mean, do something you love. Uh, I mean, that's a typical answer. I don't know. Excuse me. I mean, obviously, I'm doing what I love now, and what fulfills me in the higher purpose of the work, and if that's able to also sustain some kind of livelihood, then it's really a gift and a blessing. And I think anyone that is able to match their needs of life in terms of what what they need to live on and what they're able to get as a result of that, and if they could get that by doing something not just that they love. I mean, I think it's trite to say just follow your passion. um I think a larger part of that passion is how it serves the community, and if it's something that is not just fulfilling to you but is appreciated in making the community of people it impacts better, then that's that's all the more great that it's adding value to the world in some way. um I don't know. I've never been asked how to make money before, so I'm not sure.
How would a monk reply to this? Because money solves money problem. Everybody needs money.
It depends on what kind of monk you're asking, like the Buddha was very clear that monks are not to touch gold or silver or jewels or other things, which now means money. Uh, but 99% of Myanmar monks don't follow that rule. I mean, most of them, have some kind of money. It's just kind of too hard not to touch it. And then even those monks who might follow those rules and don't touch money, you know, they're still it can help you in guiding your attachment. It can't prevent it. You could still be attached to this construction project, or, you know, this improvement of the monastery, or this Buddha statue, to say nothing of, like, you know, those monks who have like luxury cars or whatever. But you
Monk in a
know,
luxury car. I'm trying to imagine.
well, again, it's technically they don't own it, but they, you know, they have, you know, a donor gives them a car. A donor donates a car to a monastery, and in some ways it could be very beautiful because maybe the monk is doing a lot of great work and he can now travel more easily, and it facilitates it. But in other ways, it's kind of like, you know, is that there, you know, a monk having a luxury car is not a good image.
Is that the
Yeah.
inspiration of the book Monk Who Sold His Ferrari?
I've heard of that book. I haven't read it. I don't know what I don't know. From what I've heard of the description, I don't know how much I'd really. But I think, you know, I do know other monks. Few. The one I mentioned that's inspiring to me is one that comes to mind. Who don't just, not only do they follow the rule of not touching money, but they also, their conception and relationship with money is actually very different than lay society. And you know, they don't have a desire for it. They know their needs are going to be met, and their needs are simple, and they don't really think much beyond that. And that's, you know, that's pretty profound when you, and that's something that's really special in being a monk, that however whatever a layperson might aspire to do, they still have to touch and use money. That's still always going to be a part of their life. But when you meet you know, by virtue of being a monk, where I mean, the two definitions of being a Buddhist monk, the two biggest things you give up are sexuality and relationship, and money and possessions. I mean, those are the two really big things that defy lay society. And, you know, most monks in Burma probably aren't really living that according to its intention. But when you meet those who do, and I've met foreign monks as well, I should say, not just Burmese monks, I've met foreign monks in Burma who are also living like that. It's incredibly inspiring to see how simplicity of circumstance and possessions, and also simplicity of mind, can lead to a certain kind of peace and happiness, because we're so trained and conditioned for accumulation to think we need more. I'm definitely, I can be programmed that way too, and to just remember that you can remember these examples of people
Mhm.
who aren't touching money and aren't looking to gain more money, and really just using other metrics for their life. It's inspiring.
Then people come to real life and ask, okay, these are monks. They have like they're secluded, they're recluse, they are just there and doing their things. But how do people in the real world implement that? We all have needs. For anybody to live, be alive, you need money. For going from one A place to B place, you need something. Kids, there are some other duties like to see. Everything to do something requires money.
Yeah, I think it's two words to me, you know, contentment and gratitude. If you have those, you're on the right track. If you don't have those, you're lost, you know, no matter what you have. If you're able to have a sense of contentment for what you have, not just physically, but your daily life, if you have a sense of contentment, no one can take that away from you. You know, that's you have a richness by being contented. That's a gift. If you don't have it, if you can cultivate it, and then gratitude. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm hearing
Oh, I'm
some
hearing some
echo back.
Echo. All right.
Yeah.
So, for a person who has a worry about, I need to pay this dues, I need this much money, and I don't have right now. What do I do? So, when everybody gets this thought, right? But how do you feel content at these moments?
I think there's many things pushing us away from contentment. You know, I think whether it's money or, you
No,
know,
in this specific case, would you counter that thought with, it's okay, I'll get money when I want, as much as I want. Let me just keep doing my thing. Or how would somebody react to that thought? I need money in 15 days for this dues, for that, and it cannot be done without it. What? And that
yeah,
just
right. I mean, that's a urgent life circumstance. I mean, if someone needs money for food or medicine or shelter, then that's that's another order. I think I think for those of us that are more privileged and have our basic needs taken care of, there's contentment is a state of mind. And actually, I should revise that. If you're facing urgent life circumstances, you might not be able to be contented about that. If you're really facing a critical crisis or need, developing contentment is only going to take you so far. You need to find a way practically to meet what that need is. That being said, human craving is an endless bucket that's never fulfilled. You never have enough. And so I think if you're waiting to get, quote, enough to be contented, it's a fallacy. It's never going to come. And so I think that if you have those basic needs fulfilled, to me, the real life balance to achieve for me is how do I simultaneously try to make myself and my circumstances better while also being contented with whatever I have. And that was like, I mean, meditation, that was one of the big insights that hit me is like, how do I accept and love myself for who I am with my defilements and my weaknesses? How do I completely, love and accept who I am at this moment, while also trying to find ways to improve that, and to become a better person. So I'm not stuck with where I am, but I'm also not unaccepting of myself, and that there's a tension there. It's hard to do both, but that was, I still remember the moment that thought came to me, and that's kind of been my own personal life mission since, is how do I develop a sense of contentment and self-love and acceptance in the moment, while also trying to be better, but not having that pursuit of betterness, make me constantly running.
Very interesting, and something to be pondered upon and practiced, I believe. What I want to also comment, you said Buddha told not to touch gold and money, and we have these huge pagodas which are covered in gold.
Yeah.
As we just spoke earlier in this conversation.
No, that's a good point. I mean, and those pagodas didn't exist in the Buddhist time, obviously. The pagoda existed. The reason a pagoda existed was because when they had the Buddha relics, the bones and the relics from the Buddha's body or from the body of an enlightened person, going back to ancient India, they wanted to protect those relics so that they could be honored and provide faith for those who practice the teachings. And so they built little mounds. You see those in like Bodh Gaya and places in Bihar and central India. They built these little mounds that would signify that important relics were there. Those mounds over centuries became structures in and of themselves, and cultural and architectural designs that went far beyond just being kind of a signifier that relics exist there, and have taken on other meanings. But no, in the Buddhist time, there weren't those outer edifices.
Amazing. Trish, what's on your bucket list next?
Is definitely going towards community building and focusing a lot more on resettlement program. And I used to be
Which program?
Resettlement program. Yeah, working with the refugees and the displaced who are, and then giving them training programs that would better their life. And because it's a long war, and let's be real,
Yeah.
and it's even after we win, there's gonna be the country is in ruins right now, and it will take like a really long time to get back into like what was even like 5 years ago. So so we just got to be ready for that. And yeah, and then working with like different industry or people in different walks of path. For example, like people like Joa, like for example, like doing like podcasts like that is super inspiring for me to make my own podcast, but I'm more into collaboration work and more into community building now. Yeah.
Beautiful. Short answer. 4 questions, short answer. Joe, what is your favorite movie?
Favorite movie. As a
You have to
kid, it
think so
was.
hard.
As a
You have
kid,
to
it
think
was.
so hard for a
I,
movie.
I do have to think so hard. As a kid, it was definitely Star Wars. That's a pretty easy answer. But
Mhm.
a surprise answer to that, a movie that I just absolutely adore and I can't watch enough times is Across the Universe. It's the Beatles movie of where
Oh,
they sing the Beatles songs and in kind of in a context of what they're actually doing. I was just thinking about it the other day, just scenes of that. I just think it's a pitch perfect movie for me. It just kind of awakens something inside me anytime I watch it.
Trish, what do what do Burmese like to do for fun?
Um,
So, question to you again. What? Okay, framing the question again. What do Burmese like to do for fun?
um, we actually really like to party. Um, we have right now as part of the community building is that a lot of Burmese younger generation,
How do you party?
it comes from the tea shop culture, of every morning we would just go to the tea shops and then gossip, talk, and just catch up with your neighbors, that's where the birth of politics come from. Those were like the birthplace. So
Awesome.
a lot of community gatherings, and one thing leads to another. There's alcohol, there's food, and it leads to a party.
Joe, what is your favorite book? One book.
On the Road by Jack Kerouac had a huge influence on me for sure.
All right. Trish, what does art do for the world?
um it shows both the prettiness and ugliness of the world. Yeah.
Joe, what is the most priceless gift you have ever received?
I would say meditation practice.
Trish, what advice would you give your young wait. Trish, what advice would you give your younger self?
um don't be too impulsive.
All right. So that brings us to the conclusion of today's episode. Thank you so much for being our guest. Um, what any parting words for the audience? And let's hear the parting words of Joe. Joe, can you remove that filter so we can
Yeah, you're gonna hear
eclipse the sun? Yeah.
I can move it, but you're gonna my peas are gonna pop. Without the filter, but parting words. Thank you first and foremost for welcoming us on, having a long form discussion about Myanmar, which is what we do, and to be able to reach beyond our audience and the people that are following you. I think you have a really cool thing going of being able to do deep dives into single cultures. Hopefully you'll hit every country in the world. I think that's kind of exciting to bring out all these different voices from these different places. And just thank you for you particularly with this platform, and for listeners who stuck with us for this long, for hearing this much about Myanmar and hearing about the culture and the people and the history, and for better or worse, how the politics have intertwine themselves in that in ways that are sometimes hard to separate, even when we try, as this conversation has shown. And it's been lovely to spend the last number of hours with both of you.
Thank you so much. Any feedback for me in particular about this podcast?
I think your idea for it is really cool. When you reached out to me and I looked at what you were doing and I listened to a couple of episodes, I think the one on Chad and Finland, if I'm remembering correctly, but it was the idea of just spending a long time with a single person from that country and being able to take the time to explore what it means to be from that country. I think that's a really neat idea. And there's a lot of there's places I'd like to know more about, and there's places I don't know anything about, and there's places I don't think I've ever met a single person from that place. And to be able to spend that time with them is nice. So I think it's not an idea for a podcast I've seen, and I appreciate that you're doing that.
Thank you so much. And to our lovely guest, a Burmese guest, we are getting to talk. This is the first time talking to any Burmese. So, Trish, any parting words for the audience today?
Thank you so much for listening to like all of us talk and discuss for a really long time. That's a lot of like attention span. And it's just a wonderful platform to share our experience from like two very like different backgrounds, but also really just dedicated to like Burma work, right? Like about Burma, about Myanmar. And we are like, I just want to tell to whoever out there, like, we are still here, still fighting, and um, maybe not like as rampant as like before, but then there are so many different platforms, like for example, like Insight Myanmar, and then me, like the mama, and then there's so many various like reach out to us, you know, and then research. And there are so many different platforms who's still continuing the work. So yeah, but thank you so much for having me.